So we went on then to try to circumvent that, to try to counter that with a plan that envisaged a response that was for the entire population, in the 10-point plan, in the emphasis on jobs, on defined benefit pensions in the private sector, on the repossession of homes, which are not just social issues, not just socially desirable, but which are, again, consistent with the essential message which has been put forward here by Richard Wilkinson and by Mary Murphy. They are also, you see, entirely consistent with rebuilding the domestic economy. Because people who are afraid they'll have no pensions, or their homes will be repossessed, or they'll have no job in a year's time, are not going to be spending money. And you have to address that issue of domestic confidence to rebuild a domestic economy. 50% of our GDP depends on domestic consumption, a fact which is being blithely ignored by those who are promoting the pay-cutting, terrorise the people agenda. Now, and this, of course, is really about the core issue. The core issue which is being emphasised here is not really about asserting, because most of us here believe it. Incidentally, I think even though those on the centre-right believe it, a great many of them who went into public life, the majority of them who went into public life to serve the public good, deep down they believe that morally equality and justice is superior. They don't debate the issue in the context of its moral supremacy. They debate it in terms of its economic supremacy. And they debate it, they come to the point where they concede that it would be a nice thing, but we can't afford it. And I think that the proposition which is being asserted here by Richard, and I compliment the intuition of the people who decided to invite him here, and in this manifesto, is precisely this proposition, that equality and justice, that fairness at work and justice in society are not just morally superior, but that they are economically superior as well. But and this is asserted in the third paragraph down on the front page of the brochure which is circulated here today, in different words, but nonetheless. But the fact of the matter is, and all those of us who understand that and recognise that must recognise this: that proposition has very little traction. Very little traction. Very few people believe it. Very few people understand it. And a great deal of effort and energy has been invested in ensuring that that will continue to be the case. And the real challenge facing all those of us who envisage a better society, who hope, who look forward to the day on which humanity and the development of humanity will be on a different trajectory. The key task is to ensure that the supremacy of that proposition is promulgated and is understood, because it is a very marginal pursuit at the present time. Essentially, the task, as I see it, is the task of proving the case. Because large numbers of people at the end of the day, no matter how agitated they are, no matter how frustrated they are, no matter how angry they are, will not sign on unless you can show them a proposition that works. And that's why, as long as that remains the case that we're not doing that, they will express their anger in terms of voting for Tweedledum rather than Tweedledee. And in some countries, there was a reference to racism earlier. Much, much worse. Much, much worse. And that's why I must say I compliment the organisers of this conference and those who are engaged in Isféidirling in developing this agenda. I was invited to comment on the manifesto, and I had to say something else because I don't really have very much to say about the manifesto. I broadly agree with the trust of it. I think maybe there's one or two differences that I would have, and they're not of substance. I think maybe perhaps, but maybe that will come later. There should be a greater emphasis on this task of promoting the vision, of conveying the vision, and in that context, under the heading of democracy, where it's envisaged that in bullet points 3 and 4, where it does engage, I would say tangentially, if you don't mind my saying so, with this question as to the development of the instruments by means of which you develop democracy. It omits, for example, the most fundamental one, as I would see it, the right to people's right to participate in collective bargaining, which emerged, incidentally, as a recognised fundamental human right in a very dramatic way after the mass slaughter of the Second World War. That there was a consensus around the recognition in the context of developing a kind of a New Deal type capitalism, a Rooseveltian type capitalism, that people at work would be equipped with the means by which they could engage in writing the script for the future of the world. Not that they could write it, but that they could participate in it. And the means by which people do so, working people do so, apart from voting every 5 years, in whichever way the right-wing press tells you to vote, apart from that, is by building organisations that serve as a counter to the power of global capital in the corridors of power. And I would say that is an omission both in terms of the manifesto itself and an omission both in terms of, and I think it's kind of envisaged, but in terms of the means by which this is taken forward from core principles to a practical thing. The other thing I just say, and I notice I've only 3 minutes. The other thing, 2 now. The other thing I just say is this: that it's something that you all understand, but it's worth saying it. That the subtlety of our system is such that when resources are available, we are provided with some crumbs by means of which to advocate the cause of people who are deprived in one way or another to assert their rights. But a line is drawn when it comes to campaigning for the expansion of those rights and taking the system to task. And there are many casualties of that reality. I think that combat poverty is a casualty of it. I think the Equality Agency was a casualty of it. And I think, if I may say so, Niall, on my right here, was a very courageous and dignified casualty of it. And one thing that we have to understand when we set about anything like this is that you don't make progress without taking chances, but you don't take chances for the sake of being brave. I hope to achieve my objectives by being a coward. I hope I don't ever have to be brave. But I like to believe that if I'm called upon to be brave, I will be brave. But it won't be because I was stupid. And the last thing just to say is this. In the context of where you go from here, and there's a great deal more that could be said, but this coalition that is developing here could play a critically important role in addressing a fundamental problem from the point of view of the task of placing things on a different trajectory here on this state of ours, and maybe on a wider sphere. And that is that this coalition here could play a role in forcing those on the left of which I claim to be one, from abandoning their sectarian high principles and building a broad coalition that working people and the people who depend on public services and the less well-off in our society and humanity itself fundamentally needs. Thank you very much.